They say the Earth is stable until it isn't. On the 11th of March, 2011, at precisely 2:46 p.m. local time, the illusion of safety shattered across one of the most technologically advanced nations on Earth. In mere seconds, Japan was transformed from the symbol of resilience and order to the epicenter of a planetary catastrophe. What began as a distant murmur, 80 miles off its coast and 20 miles under the sea, would soon swell into a chain of disasters the world had not witnessed in generations. By the end of that day, entire towns would be gone. Thousands would vanish without a trace. And the most feared word in modern Japan, Fukushima, would become synonymous not with the city, but with the limits of human control. This is not just the story of a natural disaster. It is the story of time compressed, of minutes that rewrote history. It's about the planet's raw power, the human will to survive, and the terrible reminder that even in the 21st century, nature can still bring a nation to its knees. And yet, what if this wasn't the end of the story? What if this was a warning of something worse yet to come? In Tokyo, the world's most populous metropolis, 35 million people went about their ordinary routines. Office workers, delivery drivers, families in high-rises saw unaware that beneath the Pacific Ocean, the Pacific tectonic plate was grinding with unstoppable force beneath the Okhotsk plate. A process that had taken centuries to build was now seconds away from releasing every ounce of stored energy. In the city of Sendai, 200 miles to the north, American teacher Paula Lutzi had just finished lunch. She and her colleagues were preparing classrooms for the afternoon. At Ozedo High School, another American, Wesley Julian, was capturing the emotion of a graduation ceremony on video lauder. Handshakes, speeches. In nearby suburbs, retirees like Katsuyoshi Hayasaka prepared for errands, taking calls from grandchildren, promising to go shopping. It was an ordinary day until the earth cracked open. At 2:45 p.m., seismic monitoring stations across Japan began registering tremors. At first, scientists thought the readings were incorrect so large, so fast, they seemed impossible. They weren't 80 miles offshore and deep within the Earth's crust. A rupture had begun. The Pacific plate was forced downward beneath the Japanese archipelago, unleashing what would soon be categorized as a magnitude 9.0 earthquake, one of the top 5 ever recorded in human history. In Tokyo, sensors buzzed. In Sendai, floors shifted beneath teachers' feet. In the Pacific, the seafloor convulsed, heaving 250 miles of crust upward, displacing 100 billion cubic meters of ocean. And all across Japan, millions of people had less than 30 seconds to react. For Paula Lutzi, the sensation began subtle yet gentle vibration, like a subway passing underground, but it didn't stop. It intensified. I just remember it kept getting stronger and stronger. She said later, we all looked at each other, and then we ran. Sendai. A mother filmed as our house groaned and swayed. Walls cracked. Bookshelves toppled. Her son crouched beneath the table, whispering, "Are we okay?" over and over. At Ozato High, Wesley Julian turned on his camera and began recording, realizing what millions feared. This was the big one. I couldn't run. One woman said, because there was nowhere to run. In a nation engineered to withstand tremors, buildings stood tall, but the ground was moving like water. In a terrifying geological phenomenon known as liquefaction, the seismic waves squeezed groundwater up through layers of sediment, turning solid earth into sludge. Entire districts in Tokyo heaved like waves in a storm. The tremor lasted 6 minutes, long enough for every window to rattle, long enough for every person to feel powerless, long enough for nuclear engineers in Fukushima to realize they were about to face the unthinkable. But the earthquake was only the beginning. Beneath the churning sea, the violent upward thrust of crust had triggered another force zone, slower, but far more deadly, a tsunami, a word that means harbor wave in Japanese, but means apocalypse to those who have lived through it. The quake had lifted the seafloor more than 3 meters. Above it, the displaced ocean began to ripple outward, slowly at first, then faster still. At its leading edge, the wave reached speeds of over 500 miles per hour, nearly as fast as a commercial jetliner. But as it neared the coast, the real danger grew because while the wave slowed, it grew taller. At Sendai's Tsunami Warning Center, scientists scrambled to calculate impact zones. But many sensors along the coast had already been destroyed by the quake itself. Early warning systems were crippled. Across the country, televisions and loudspeakers issued the same chilling message: tsunami warning, evacuate immediately. But how do you run from the sea? How fast can you flee when roads are cracked and bridges are gone? American conservationist Brian Barnes was in the coastal town of Atsuchi, working on a project when he realized the extent of the crisis. Sirens wailed. Locals shouted for people to get to higher ground. Brian's camera rolled as he fled. I didn't actually realize, he would say later, that I was documenting the final moments of the entire town. At 3:15 p.m., just 29 minutes after the earthquake struck, the first tsunami waves hit the Japanese coast, 14 meters high, nearly 46 feet. The wall of water obliterated everything in its path. In Kamaishi, waves rushed through streets only 10 meters wide, turning narrow alleys into death traps. The water accelerated its mass, compacted into tight spaces, shattering cars, buildings, bodies. In the town of Shiogama, an eyewitness camera caught a small car being swept away. Its driver, powerless, seconds from death. In just 4 minutes and 15 seconds, entire city blocks were swallowed. In one video, a warehouse weighing thousands of tons was lifted off its foundation and tossed like a toy. In another, a man's voice cracked as he whispered, "Is this how it ends?" By 3:57 p.m., the water reached Sendai Airport over a mile inland. There, air traffic controller Yoshi Kabune had been directing aircraft during the quake itself. Now, he climbed to the upper levels of the tower as his own car was swallowed below. One survivor later described it like this: "It felt like watching the end of the world. The sea didn't stop. It just kept coming. It wanted everything." As seawater swept 6 miles inland, carving up coastlines and drowning cities, a darker threat was awakening silent, invisible, and potentially more lethal than either the earthquake or the tsunami. 90 miles from the epicenter, on the eastern coast of Honshu, stood the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant. The quake had already damaged external power lines, cutting electricity to the facility. Within seconds, emergency systems activated. Diesel generators kicked in to continue cooling the nuclear fuel rods inside reactors 1, R, and 3, an essential step in safely shutting them down. But the tsunami had one more card to play. The seawall around the plant stood 7 meters tall. The tsunami exceeded 14 meters. It overtopped the defenses like a beast, lunging over a garden fence, and swallowed the entire complex. Backup diesel generators, housed in low-lying buildings, were flooded and destroyed. Critical systems failed. Inside the control rooms, Alarms screamed as temperatures began to climb. Without cooling, the nuclear cores were essentially ticking time bombs. Masao Yoshida, the plant's superintendent, faced a decision no man ever wants to make: allow the reactors to overheat and risk full-scale meltdown, or manually flood the chambers with seawater, permanently destroying the billion-dollar reactors, but possibly saving the region and the world from disaster. Tokyo's nuclear engineer Mitsuhiko Tanaka, who had worked on the design of the plant decades earlier, sat in horror watching the news. As soon as I heard the epicenter was offshore, Fukushima, he later said, I knew this was going to be terrible. And it was. By the evening of the 11th of March, only one line of defense remained: battery-powered pumps with an 8-hour charge. It was a race against time and heat, but heat is patient, and the clock was merciless. On the 12th of March, Reactor 1 exploded. A plume of smoke rose into the air, and the outer shell of the reactor building crumbled like a house of cards. 2 days later, Reactor 3 exploded with even greater force, launching concrete slabs hundreds of feet into the air. Reactor 2 followed. Its suppression chamber breached. The world watched in silence. A nuclear facility designed to the highest safety standards was in free fall. Yoshida and a team of about 50 workers, later called the Fukushima 50, stayed behind, risking fatal radiation exposure to try and cool the reactors using seawater and improvised equipment. They worked in darkness, amid rising heat and spreading radiation. Yukio, a Tokyo firefighter and one of the emergency responders, described the scene. It was like entering a haunted house, only it was real. Reactor 3 was right in front of us, still smoking. There were no sirens, no flames, only the knowledge that invisible death was leaking into the air. And yet, they stayed. I didn't know much about radiation, Yukio admitted, but I believe large exposure meant death. Still, duty was stronger than fear. The radiation leak at Fukushima was later classified as a level 7 nuclear event, the highest possible rating. The only other disaster ever to receive this rating was Chernobyl in 1986. For Japan, a country still haunted by the memory of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the word radiation carried a cultural trauma far deeper than scientific terminology could explain. For survivors and responders alike, the psychological toll was immense. Yet, the battle wasn't over, because what had begun in Japan had now crossed the sea. Part 3. A wave that traveled the world. By midnight in Tokyo, the tsunami was no longer a Japanese disaster. It was a global one. The surge, still powerful, raced across the Pacific at 450 miles per hour. In Hawaii, waves battered the coastline. In California, harbors flooded. Santa Cruz saw dockyards destroyed. Boats smashed together like driftwood. In total, the tsunami traveled over 5,000 miles. It crossed an entire ocean, touched the shores of multiple continents, and reminded the world that natural disasters do not recognize borders. Seismologists around the globe sprang into action, from Chile to Alaska, from the Philippines to New Zealand. Researchers analyzed seismic activity with growing alarm, because this wasn't just about one rupture on one fault. This was part of a pattern. Tom Jordan, a geophysicist, explained the sobering reality. In just over a year, 3 massive events occurred on the Ring of Fire: magnitude 8 in Chile, a 6, 1 in Christchurch, and now this 9, 0 in Japan. It's like a chain reaction. You start to wonder, What's next? And there was one fault in particular that kept coming up in hushed conversations. The Cascadia subduction zone, located just 50 miles off the U.S. Pacific Northwest, the Cascadia Fault mirrors the fault that broke in Japan. It too features oceanic crust plunging under continental plates. It too has built up centuries of pressure. And it too is long overdue. If Cascadia ruptures in the same way, cities like Seattle, Portland, and Vancouver could be devastated. Tsunami warnings would offer less than 25 minutes of lead time. Emergency services could be paralyzed. America, in other words, could become Japan. Or worse, back in Japan, the scale of the catastrophe began to emerge. The tsunami reached a staggering 38 meet 125 rupees, feet above sea level at its highest point. Whole towns disappeared from maps. In Otsuke, where Brian Barnes had recorded his desperate escape, barely a soul remained. I went back, he said, but I didn't recognize anything. There was no one left to bury the dead. The living had nowhere to sleep. It was hell on earth. Over 18. 0 people were confirmed dead or missing. Hundreds of thousands were displaced. And across the battered coastline, survivors found themselves returning not to homes, but to fields of debris and ghost towns of silence. At one school building that had withstood the waves, Katsuyoshi Hayasaka stood staring at the only structure still standing in his hometown. This building saved me, he said, but my house, it's gone. The infrastructure of northern Japan was obliterated. Roads, trains, hospitals, power lines all gone. Entire neighborhoods turned to swamps. Fires raged through some districts, ignited by broken gas lines. In the bitter cold of early spring, tens of thousands found shelter in gymnasiums, schools, even tunnel shuttled together, waiting for food, medicine, or simply word of loved ones. Aid trickled in. The military deployed. Helicopters flew non-stop missions, ferrying survivors to safety. But there were never enough blankets, never enough tents, and never enough answers. Paola Luzzi, who had been with her students in Sendai when the quake hit, stayed behind to organize aid. She and a small group built a grassroots relief operation, pinning a map to a wall, marking villages, assessing needs, sending supply trucks to places even the military hadn't reached. Every morning, she said, we got shipments from the south. We sorted them and drove them out ourselves. Because if we didn't, nobody else would. Across the Pacific, Wesley Julian, who had filmed the graduation before the quake, struggled with grief. One of my friends died. He said, the last thing I ever said to them was, see ya, not goodbye, not take care, just see ya. He paused, eyes wet. Now, I say goodbye like I mean it. As weeks turned into months, Japan's national psychiatr's belief in order, discipline, and preparedness was tested in ways it had not experienced since the end of World War II. This wasn't just a physical catastrophe. It was a moral one. The very institutions meant to protect the public energy agencies, government ministries. Even the corporate owners of the Fukushima plant stood accused of failing to warn, failing to plan, and most of all, failing to tell the truth. Masao Yoshida, the Fukushima plant chief, would later confess that he disobeyed orders from his superiors at Tokyo Electric Power Company, or TEPCO. When they told him to stop flooding the reactor with seawater, he ignored them. He knew that without cooling, the reactors would go into full meltdown. His defiance may have saved millions of lives, but it also exposed a deep, uncomfortable truth. In the chaos of crisis, bureaucracies often move too slowly, while brave individuals must decide when to break ranks. In Tokyo, rolling blackouts swept across neighborhoods. In Fukushima Prefecture, children played indoors for fear of invisible radiation dust coating the grass. In the media, debate raged. How close had Japan come to losing control of its nuclear future? Could another explosion have irradiated the capital? Could the Pacific have been poisoned? The government issued evacuation orders. Families were torn apart. Businesses collapsed. Schools were shut down indefinitely. The contaminated zone around the plant later known as the Fukushima exclusion zone became a modern ghost region, and yet the survivors did not vanish. They adapted. In shelters across the country, children learned to sleep side by side with strangers. Doctors taught volunteers how to clean wounds without medicine. Communities formed spontaneous microeconomies bartering water, clothes, even phone charges. In the face of staggering loss, the Japanese people did what they have always done best: endured with dignity. Still, the questions would not go away. Why had the sea walls been built too low? Why had the backup power systems been stored in basements below tsunami level? Why had the nuclear plant been constructed in one of the most seismically active zones on Earth? The answers were murky, often buried in a labyrinth of corporate decisions and government regulations. But one thing was clear: the myth of perfect preparedness had been shattered. As Japan mourned, the rest of the world stared uneasily at its own reflection. What if this had happened in California? What if this had been Shanghai? Or Manila? Or Jakarta? The ring of fire stretches across the Pacific Basin, touching every major economic hub in the region, from the Aleutians to Chile, from Taiwan to Alaska. It is a chain of fault lines and volcanic ridges that link nations not through culture or politics, but through shared geological vulnerability. Scientists began sounding the alarm in new tones. In Oregon and Washington, local governments reviewed evacuation plans. In Indonesia, citizens remembered the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami, which killed over 230,000 people. And in the United States, public attention turned toward the Cascadia subduction zenith, silent beast beneath the Northwest. Here, pressure has been building for centuries. If it slips, experts say, it could produce a magnitude 9 earthquake, followed by a tsunami that would devastate the coast of Washington, Oregon, and British Columbia. The U.S. Geological Survey has modeled such a scenario nicknamed the Big One, and the results are chilling. Bridges gone, hospitals overwhelmed, airports submerged, over 10. Zero potential fatalities in the first day. And the warning signs, almost identical to those Japan faced before 2011. In Japan, the earth did not settle quickly. After the main quake on the 11th of March, thousands of aftershocks rattled the region for months. Some measured over magnitude 7, powerful enough to be standalone disasters in their own right. Buildings cracked further, landslides occurred, nerves frayed. People began living with what one Tokyo resident described as phantom quakes, the sensation of shaking, even when none occurred. Geophysicist Tom Jordan tracked the sequence obsessively. He saw a pattern not just of release, but of reconfiguration. The Earth, it seemed, it was not returning to equilibrium. It was rewriting its own map. Satellites confirmed it. Japan had shifted eastward by more than 8 feet. The entire island. The quake was so powerful that it tilted the Earth's axis by nearly 25 centimeters and shortened the length of our days by microseconds. One event, one fracture, and even time itself had changed. The human cost would take longer to calculate. Some 470 zero people were displaced. Entire towns were never rebuilt. More than 18 new confirmed dead. Thousands more still listed as missing. And an untold number mentally scarred, physically injured, or poisoned by radiation would carry the marks for the rest of their lives. In the weeks that followed, international aid flowed into Japan rescue teams, medical supplies, engineers, but money could not rebuild trust and sympathy could not restore the dead. At one shelter, a woman whispered through tears, "We are starting from zero. We have nothing, but we are still here." American volunteer Wesley Julian continued organizing donations from the United States, his heart still in Japan. "I reevaluated everything," he said, "because I survived and others didn't. It's not fair, but that's how life works. So you do what you can." In the ruins of Sendai, Katsuyoshi Hayasaka searched for his old home. Only one building stood, the school that saved him. "I will never leave this town," he said softly. "It took everything from me, but I am still part of it." The 11th of March, 2011, was the day a modern superpower fell to its knees. But it was not the end of Japan, nor was it the end of the world. It was a reminder that even now, we live on a restless planet, that for all our skyscrapers, satellites, and sensors, the Earth still moves according to its own laws. That in every clock tick, every subtle shift beneath our feet, lies the potential for an event we cannot predict. Only endure. The ring of fire still burns. The faults are still there. The Pacific breathes in silence. And we must ask, what happens when it breathes out again? Soft closing line. If you found this story moving, consider subscribing to Legacy Files, where the PA, the 11th of March, 2011, was the day a modern superpower fell to its knees. But it was not the end of Japan, nor was it the end of the world. It was a reminder that even now, we live on a restless planet, that for all our skyscrapers, satellites, and sensors, the Earth still moves according to its own laws. That in every clock tick, every subtle shift beneath our feet, lies the potential for an event we cannot predict. Only endure. The ring of fire still burns. The faults are still there. The Pacific breathes in silence. And we must ask, what happens when it breathes out again? Soft closing line. If you found this story moving, consider subscribing to Legacy Files, where the PA, the 11th of March, 2011, was the day a modern superpower fell to its knees. But it was not the end of Japan, nor was it the end of the world. It was a reminder that even now, we live on a restless planet. That for all our skyscrapers, satellites, and sensors, the Earth still moves according to its own laws. That in every clock tick, every subtle shift beneath our feet, lies the potential for an event we cannot predict. Only endure. The ring of fire still burns. The faults are still there. The Pacific breathes in silence. And we must ask, what happens when it breathes out again? Soft closing line. If you found this story moving, consider subscribing to Legacy Files, where the PA, the 11th of March, 2011, was the day a modern superpower fell to its knees. But it was not the end of Japan, nor was it the end of the world. It was a reminder that even now, we live on a restless planet. That for all our skyscrapers, satellites, and sensors, the Earth still moves according to its own laws. That in every clock tick, every subtle shift beneath our feet, lies the potential for an event we cannot predict, only endure. The ring of fire still burns, the faults are still there. The Pacific breathes in silence, and we must ask, what happens when it breathes out again? Soft closing line. If you found this story moving, consider subscribing to Legacy Filesware, the PA, the 11th of March. 2011was the day a modern superpower fell to its knees, but it was not the end of Japan, nor was it the end of the world. It was a reminder that even now, we live on a restless planet, that for all our skyscrapers, satellites, and sensors, the Earth still moves according to its own laws, that in every clock tick, every subtle shift beneath our feet, lies the potential for an event we cannot predict, only endure. The ring of fire still burns. The faults are still there. The Pacific breathes in silence, and we must ask, what happens when it breathes out again? Soft closing line. If you found this story moving, consider subscribing to Legacy Files where the past lives, breathes, and sometimes warns